Solve the inequality x minus 3 times x plus 1 is greater than or equal to 0. Now there are two approaches to solving these questions, either using the graph or using what is known as a sign diagram or sign table. My personal preference is the graph, but I'm going to show you both methods here so you can see and you can choose which one you prefer. Let's start with the graph. First of all, I'm going to graph what this function looks like. So looking at the axes, what does x minus 3, x plus 1 look like? It goes through 3, negative 1. So it's going to come through negative 1 and then go through 3. Now in this question, what I want it when this graph is greater than or equal to 0. When is this function greater than or equal to 0? That is here and here, these two bits here. So now what I'm interested in is what are the x values that lead to that? The x values that lead to that are from 3 that way or from minus 1 that way, which gives me my solutions. Either x is less than or equal to negative 1 or x is greater than or equal to 3. The other way to approach this is using a sign diagram. A sign diagram determines the sign of the graph at each point. We start by setting up a table for x values and f of x values. The x values I'm going to make sure that I choose my two roots, which are minus 1 and 3. And at those points, I know that f of x is equal to 0 because they are roots. I'm then going to choose points on either side of those. So one point in the middle, maybe 0, 1 point to the left of minus 1, and 1 point to the right of 3. And for each of these, I'm going to work out the sign of the answer. I'm not particularly interested in how big it is, just whether it's positive or negative. So when I put minus 2 in, minus 2 minus 3 is going to be negative. Minus 2 plus 1 is also going to be negative. So I'm going to end up with a negative times by a negative, which means this is positive. At 0, I get negative 3 times 1. So that's a negative times by a positive, which gives me a negative answer. At 4, I get 1 times 5. So a positive times by a positive. So the answer is positive. If I'm interested in when it is greater than or equal to 0, that is this point that way because it is positive there, and this point that way because it is positive there. It gives us the same answer as we got before. X is less than or equal to negative 1. X is greater than or equal to 3. Doesn't particularly matter which method you use. For quadratics, graphing is hopefully relatively straightforward because we know how to sketch quadratics. For more complicated functions, that might not be the case. It might be easier to do a sign diagram. However, if we're in a calculator exam, then a calculator is going to be able to graph that function very easily, and you're going to be able to solve it using the calculator quite easily graphically. It's your choice which method you prefer. As I said, my personal preference is the graphs because I think it is easier to see what's going on, and also it's good practice at sketching quadratics. But the sign diagram is also a useful tool, and we will be using sign diagrams when we come to calculus in Unit 4. We'll see a time when we have to use sign diagrams there. So it's good to see it here to have sort of some prior knowledge of it before we get to that later as well. But you can choose which method you prefer. They will both lead to the same answer.